I didn't think that a month into building in my new studio, I would already need a bigger desk. Welcome back to Craft Computing, everyone. As always, I'm Jeff, and today, I just feel like building something. The parts on the table in front of me are going to make up an $1,150 gaming PC, but as far as YouTube's concerned, I am going about this a little bit of an unorthodox way. I'm not going for the best bang for the buck performance build that you can possibly put together for $1,150. Rather, I am going to be making some stylistic and aesthetic choices and making what I think is one of the best looking $1,150 gaming PCs that's out there. Don't worry, we are going to get fantastic performance out of this system, but it will not be the best performance you can get out of this system for the same amount of money. Starting with the heart of this build right down there in front, that is the AMD Ryzen 5 3600 6-core 12-threaded CPU. It's selling for as little as about $179 on Amazon today. The really cool thing about that is harken back to about 2 years ago when Intel was selling the 8700K, also a 6-core 12-threaded CPU, for $389. So you're getting pretty much identical performance for less than half the money. Sitting right next to that is a 16GB kit of Patriot Viper's Blackout Edition memory. This is a kit made specifically for AMD Ryzen CPUs running at 3600 MHz at CAS17. And when we get into the performance testing of this kit, I'll go ahead and show you what a difference a little bit faster memory speed can do to your AMD system. The motherboard for today's build is going to be an MSI B450 Tomahawk, and I love the aesthetics on this board. It does have a little bit of RGB, which is something I was actively avoiding with a lot of these parts today. However, it's just an underglow behind the motherboard and should look pretty fantastic. What's also going to look fantastic is the black and steel aesthetic on top of this motherboard, coupled with the Patriot Viper Blackout series memory. For the graphics card, I opted to go with the Asus ROG Strix RX 5700. I really liked this graphics card in testing. Now, it is certainly not the cheapest version of an RX 5700, however, it looks fantastic. There's just enough RGB on it to give it a little bit of a glow, very similar to the motherboard, but the triple fan design kept it running very cool and quiet inside of my case, and again, it should be an excellent match for all the components here today. The power supply in today's build is going to be a Be Quiet Straight Power 11. It's a 650 watt gold rated fully modular unit. And for the case, we have a Be Quiet Pure Base 500 in white. It's a full ATX case with a tempered glass side panel and comes with a pair of Be Quiet Silent Wing 140mm fans. That should provide plenty of airflow for our components, but still keep things, well, pretty quiet. For storage, I'm going back to my favorite NVMe drive, which is the Silicon Power 512GB. It runs you about $70 on Amazon and is one of the best bang for the buck performance options you can get. However, 512GB is not nearly enough for storage on modern games, so I opted for a spinning disk, in this case the Western Digital 2TB black drive. Now that I've been through all the parts, I can make a little bit of room for some more important things on the table. That's better. So I mentioned at the top of this video that this is not going to be the best performance per dollar build that's out there, but beyond the 5700, where am I wasting money? Well, I'm glad you asked. Well, the Ryzen 5 3600 comes with a pretty decent cooler in the Wraith Stealth. However, I opted to go with a Be Quiet Dark Rock Pro 4. Now, this is way overkill, and I really don't recommend you go out and spend $100 on a cooler for a $180 processor. But in this case, we're going to see, number one, how far we can overclock the Ryzen 3600 to get better performance out of it, and number two, how quiet can we keep this thing. So, with all this out of the way, let's get this thing together. So here is the build, and honestly it came out beautifully, but there is a little bit more than usual to talk about on this one. So let's go ahead and jump on the other side of the room here and go over a few things. Now, normally in a system build video like this, I would give you all the performance numbers in a nice little montage, and then we'd talk about individual games and whether or not the system as a whole is a good value. In this particular case, I'm actually going to go through component by component because there's actually a lot to talk about with this system. We'll go ahead and start off with the case. This again is the Be Quiet Pure Base 500. And first off, I was wrong about which case they sent over for review. This is the solid side panel model, not the tempered glass side panel as I mentioned earlier in the video. But that actually worked out in favor of this build. Again, I was trying to build a not so flashy and very, very quiet gaming rig. And honestly, having the solid side panel really helped in that goal. The reason being is this side panel actually has a noise deadening material inside of it. It's on this panel, it's also on the back panel, as well as on the removable top panel here. So under full system load, like running Heaven Benchmark, this thing stays deadly silent. Moving on to the inside of the case, and you can see the Be Quiet Dark Rock Pro 4 has plenty of clearance from that side panel. Plenty of room to breathe on either side of it as well. And don't worry, we will be circling around to my decision to use that cooler here momentarily. The Pure Base 500 also comes with two of ththese Pure Wing 2 140mm fans, one in the rear and one in the front. And honestly, for the level of hardware that I have in this case, that is more than enough ventilation. It kept everything very, very cool, as the numbers here will show you. If I stepped up to much higher tier hardware, I would definitely want to add a little bit more intake and a little bit more exhaust to this case. Now, you can put an additional two 140mm fans on the top, and I believe a total of 340mm fans in the front. So there is room for expansion here if you feel you need it. But again, for a 65-watt TDP processor and a, 180-watt TDP graphics card, this is more than enough ventilation for this system. For storage, the case has room for four 2.5-inch drives and two 3.5-inch drives. On the 3.5-inch drives, I really appreciate the drive trays as they are rubber grommeted, cutting down on the vibration transfer from the drives into the case. Again, just helping the overall noise generated by the system, living up to that Be Quiet name. Last thing I wanted to touch on for the case was the cable management, or how prevalent the cable management was and how intuitive it is to route cables in this thing. This is, without a doubt, one of the cleanest systems I have ever built on this channel, simply because the cable management was so easy to do. Now, it took a lot of zip ties to do it, but man, the results are just fantastic. Touching on the motherboard in this system really quickly, the MSI B450 Tomahawk, let me just say, MSI, thank you from the bottom of my heart for your BIOS flashback feature. When I put the system together with that Ryzen 3600 processor, it really didn't cross my mind that the BIOS may be so out of date on it, it may not support Ryzen 3rd generation processors yet. And as it turns out, it didn't. Making matters worse, the only Ryzen CPUs that I have available that are 1st and 2nd generation are currently in other systems. So I would have to tear another system apart, tear this system apart, swap CPUs, update the BIOS, swap them back, and then hopefully get this thing to post. Luckily, this board not only has the BIOS flashback function, it also worked beautifully. I put the BIOS onto a flash drive, put the flash drive into the back of the computer, and then pressed the BIOS flashback button. A couple of blinky lights and 5 minutes of my time later, and I had a fully working Ryzen 3rd generation system. So MSI, thank you for your BIOS flashback feature. Now, put it in all your motherboards, please. Now that that's all out of the way, let's go ahead and get into the actual system performance, starting with the Patriot Viper Blackout Edition memory. This is a 16GB kit with two 8GB sticks running at 3600 MHz and 17, 19, 19, 39 timings. Now, setting AXMP on this MSI motherboard did jump us all the way up to 3600 MHz. However, the timings I did have to adjust manually. But since I did that, this kit has been working flawlessly and very, very stable. So I can absolutely recommend this kit, as Ryzen, even in the 3000 series, is not the greatest with memory compatibility, but this kit seems to be rock solid on this platform. And if you needed any proof that this is a very high-performing memory kit, look no further than my Cinebench R15 score, in which I set my second highest 6-core CPU score ever on a stock Ryzen 3600 at 1590 points. Now, to put 1590 points into perspective, it beat the Ryzen 5 2600 by a full 200 points, and it fell only 64 points shy of my all-time leader for 6 cores, the 5.1 GHz overclocked 8700K. And again, this is a stock speed CPU. And that segues perfectly into, well, a mistake that I made with this system. This system did not need a Be Quiet Dark Rock Pro 4 for a CPU cooler. In fact, I probably could have gotten identical results and noise levels with the Wraith Stealth that came stock with the Ryzen 5 3600. When I was putting all the parts together for this build, I was planning on overclocking the absolute snot out of that Ryzen 5 3600 and seeing what kind of performance I could get out of it. Now it has a base clock of 3.6 GHz and a boost clock of 4.2, so I figured 4.2 GHz for an overclock should be a pretty good starting point. No. On my first attempt, I went to 4.1 GHz at 1.40 volts, and it booted straight into Windows and had no problem running through Cinebench multiple times in a row without crashing. So far, so good. So I clicked it up to 4.2 GHz, and was still able to boot into Windows and launch Cinebench, but as soon as I clicked Run, immediately I got an error message on the screen saying the render had failed. Now this isn't an entirely uncommon error message, it's just a soft crash within Cinebench. However, if I clicked Run again, the system would immediately hardlock. There was no delay or maybe try to start rendering, none of the squares appeared, it just locked. I figured all we needed to do to get a stable overclock at 4.2 or potentially even higher was just up my voltage a little bit. So I went to 1.42, 1.4375, 1.4425. That's about as high as I'm comfortable running this chip, and I got the same exact results every single time. So what is the lesson here? Well, sometimes you win some and sometimes you lose some. This CPU does have a boost clock of 4.2 GHz. However, it appears I have at least one core on here that will not go beyond 4.1. I was able to get into Windows and launch some applications and go around the interface. In fact, I browsed the web for a little bit at 4.2 GHz. But as soon as I tried to do anything intensive, the system would hard lock almost immediately. 4.1 GHz worked just fine in every single game. However, it also disabled the game boost functionality, which limited two of my cores from boosting even higher up to that 4.2 GHz mark. So I was actually getting better speeds by leaving the CPU on automatic rather than manually overclocking it to 4.1. So was the Be Quiet Dark Pro 4 necessary? Absolutely not. In fact, I got a 66.5 degrees Celsius on my hottest core. I probably could have gotten the exact same performance with maybe a little bit more noise out of the Wraith Stealth cooler that came in the box. But how about the looks and the noise level? Is the $90 worth it then? Honestly, I'm still gonna say no, and the reason being is as good as this CPU cooler looks inside of this case, remember, this came with a solid metal side panel. So for this build, this cooler's just a no-go. Now, I'm not saying there's no upgrade path from the Wraith Stealth that you should buy for the Ryzen 5 3600. I'm just saying $90 is probably money wasted. I'd go for something more of like a Deepcool Gamax GT or maybe the brand new Hyper 212 Evo version 2 from Cooler Master if you wanted better cooling performance, lower noise, and a better look than just the stock box cooler. But for a system like this, Wraith Stealth. Moving into the gaming results with the Asus ROG Strix RX 5700, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this card because I did just review it about 6 weeks ago, and you can click right up here if you want to see that video. However, I am going to say at 1080p on this system, this makes a phenomenal 144Hz gamer. In fact, at 1080p, there was only one game that came in below 110 FPS on average, and no surprise, it was Red Dead Redemption 2, coming in with a 52.8. This was with what I would consider medium-high settings, with the slider about 6 from the top in the presets, so still visually gorgeous in the game, but man, you need a lot of horsepower to run this one. Moving on to 1440p, and this system makes a pretty good 90Hz gamer as well, with my lowest scores coming in with GTA 5 at 76.1 and Hitman at 83.6, but still very respectable and room to improve as these were both with ultra settings. So there we go. Honestly, I'm not sure how to call this one. Obviously, the performance numbers are pretty darn solid, and this is absolutely a great gaming machine, but I do feel a little bit underwhelmed with where the performance came in at for that $1,150 price tag. It's not that I don't like the Dark Pro 4, in fact it's one of my favorite looking coolers in a while, it's just that it's $90 sitting inside the case being completely wasted. You're obviously not going to see it once that metal side panel is on, and it's not giving me that extra overclocking headroom I was hoping for on the Ryzen 5. But that's the way the silicon lottery goes sometimes. So the question is, what would I upgrade if I could allocate that money into a different part? Well, we could upgrade the CPU to maybe like a Ryzen 7 3700X, but as this was primarily a gaming machine build, I don't think we're going to see any return out of it. I don't think the 3700X is going to game that much better than a Ryzen 5 3600 outside of a couple very select titles. For my money, I would upgrade the graphics card, maybe to something like an RTX 2070 Super, as remember, this is only an RX 5700, not the XT model, so there is some more performance to be had for a little bit more money. If you like this video, make sure to click that thumbs up button down below in hopes that other people will see it and like it too. And if you didn't like it, there's that button, and don't worry, I hate you too. Amazon affiliate links are available for all the parts in today's build in the video description below. If you are thinking about picking up any of these parts for yourself, consider giving those a click. It really does help out the channel. The other thing that helps out the channel, joining the Patreon. Link for that is also down in the video description. You get exclusive access to my Discord server, where you can chat with myself and the other hosts from Talking Heads, and it also helps out with builds like this one. And there'll be more on this guy later this week. Anyway, that's going to do it for me in this one, guys. Thank you all so much for watching, and as always, I will see you in the next video. Cheers, guys.